Congressman Mrvan for his work as Vice Chair of the Steel Caucus and for helping to organize this morning's forum. The state of steel at this moment is resilient. Despite inflation still hurting the wallets of Americans from all walks of life, the industry is growing. I'm proud to say that my district, the 1st Congressional District of Arkansas, is now the largest steel-producing district in the country, and the growth continues despite inflation. The steel industry is a proud example of how we can manufacture the highest quality product here in America, even during economic uncertainty. American steel supports more than 2 million jobs and is the backbone of American infrastructure, national defense, and manufacturing. The role of the domestic steel industry throughout the pandemic and subsequent supply chain instability is a true testament to its resilience in the face of adversity and its importance to the American economy. There are several items I'm working on in Congress to benefit my district's largest industry that our witnesses and viewers online should be aware of. First and foremost, as the chair of the Highways and Transportation Subcommittee, I'm focused on moving goods along our nation's highways. This includes steel. We must maintain our transportation infrastructure at the highest levels to facilitate the movement of goods such as steel. It literally takes an army of men and women to produce steel before it hits various transportation as it moves to market. If we don't maintain not only rail and waterways, but also roadways, we can't get goods to market and continue domestic steel production growth. Trade is top of mind for many in steel and the industries that rely on steel. Even though we haven't seen much out of the Biden administration overall on this front, it is encouraging to see that strong stance already taken by Ambassador Catherine Tai in their support of Section 232 tariffs. This is especially true in the face of WTO's rulings against 232s, which, and I'll use the trade representative words, quote, challenges the integrity of the system that the WTO has put in place. Further, Congress must continue to ensure that trade enforcement agencies have sufficient resources to keep bad actors out of our market. I was proud to join Congressman Mrvan in a letter last month to Trade Representative and Secretary of Commerce to address the surge of Mexican steel imports in violation of Section 232. Over the past several months, members of the domestic steel industry and the United States Steelworkers have brought to our attention the economic harm that this breach has caused on workers and our ability for steel to support our national economy and our national security. For example, total steel imports from Mexico increased by approximately 72% in 2022, with increases across major product lines, including rebar, hot rolled, galvanized sheet, carbon and galvanized wire, wire rod, pipe and tube, steel conduit, semi-finished, and other products. Mexican rebar imports were more than 3,000% greater by volume in 2022 than their 2015-2017 annual average. Additionally, the Mexican steel industry is taking advantage of status under the U.S.-Mexico agreement to export to our nation steel produced in countries that remain subject to Section 232 measures. Reports and data from the U.S. Steel Import Monitoring and Analysis System reveal that significant volumes of steel melted and poured in countries such as Brazil, South Korea, and even Russia have entered through Mexico to the United States duty-free under the agreement. The whole point of the agreement was to prevent the U.S. from being a dumping ground for Mexican and global overcapacity that harms our producers, workers, and communities. The Mexican refusal to honor the agreement has weakened the domestic industry, thus considerably decreasing production and capacity utilization this year. This occurs as the American steel industry invests significantly in new state-of-the-art, low-emission steel facilities. Instead, the availability of good-paying job opportunities in our nation is being threatened. The Section 232 measures have been and remain critical to improving the industry's performance and should not be further weakened. And there's much to do, including updating U.S. trade remedy laws to reflect 21st century challenges and establishing rules and standards for a resilient domestic steel industry. The American steel industry is already recognized as a global leader in sustainable steel production and continues to make investments in existing and new state-of-the-art facilities in the United States. However, these advancements are compromised every time a foreign government or producer seeks a competitive advantage by cutting corners on sustainability. The steel industry must remain a vital part of everyday American life, from national defense to transportation and logistics to critical infrastructure. We look forward to working with the administration to ensure that the steel industry, its innovative products, and its dedicated and highly skilled workers are integral to our country's low-carbon future. We continue to support vigorous trade enforcement that will ensure a vibrant industry, competitive wages, and outstanding quality of life for our industry's workers. Before we proceed with Vice Chair Mrvan and witness opening statements, I want to acknowledge our more than 100 members of the Congressional Steel Caucus and thank many of them for being here today. This is truly a bipartisan group of lawmakers working together to grow American steel production and American jobs. I thank each of our members for their work, and I again thank Vice Chairman Mrvan and now move to recognize him for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Crawford, for the recognition, and thank you for your leadership and a bipartisan collaboration for convening this hearing on the state of the steel industry and on all our initiatives to benefit workers and the steel industry in the 118th Congress. Thank you as well to all of our witnesses here today for your participation and your dedication to supporting and the strength of our manufacturing base and the economic vitality of the steel-producing regions throughout our nation. I'm proud to represent Indiana's 1st Congressional District, which is, as you all are well aware, is home to an incredible steel workforce, steel production capabilities. As the grandson of a card-carrying member of the United Steelworkers who spent 53 years in the steel mills in East Chicago, I am grateful for the opportunity to serve as Vice Chairman of the Congressional Steel Caucus and to join everyone in this room supporting and advocating for the long-term success and vitality of the domestic steel industry. It is in my first term in Congress, I was proud to be able to support several laws that aim to strengthen our economy and make historic investments in our nation's economic and transportation infrastructure. For example, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is continuing to deliver necessary investment in our roads, bridges, rails, ports, and these funds are dispersed. We will continue to conduct oversight of and promote the maximum benefit of the expanded Buy American requirements. I also was proud to support the CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, which will continue to support improvements in our supply chain network and advancements in environmentally friendly technologies. I'm grateful for the dedicated efforts of the domestic steel industry to make such committed efforts in sustainable technologies and look forward to hearing about your latest advancements in this area. And finally, I appreciate the collaboration of Chairman Crawford and other members of this caucus on recent communications to support full and fair enforcement of our trade laws, including letters advocating for the continuation of Section 232 steel tariffs and addressing the recent surge of Mexican steel imports and supporting additional funds for the work of the International Trade Commission and the International Trade Administration. We know that American workers can compete with anyone in the world when given a level playing field, and I look forward to continuing to collaborate with my colleagues to enhance our trade remedy abilities. Thank you again to all of our witnesses for participating in today's hearing. I am grateful for your dedicated initiatives to support our workers, our national economy, and our national security. I look forward to your testimony and the subsequent discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Mrvan. I now want to recognize our distinguished witnesses and thank you all for being here today. Your testimony to the House of Representatives Congressional Steel Caucus is a critical part of our work year after year, and we appreciate your input and insight as leaders in the steel industry. First, it's my pleasure to introduce Leon Topalian, the Chair, President, and CEO of Nucor Corporation. Mr. Topalian began his career with Nucor in 1996, working on the construction of a new steel mill in South Carolina. He has served in many roles at Nucor, including as the Vice President and General Manager of Nucor Yamato Steel Company in my district. Nucor's decision to build that mill transformed Mississippi County, Arkansas, which lost jobs with the closure of the Acre Air Force Base back in the early 90s. The company went on to build a second mill in the county, and in just the last 5 years, Nucor has invested over $1 billion in its 2 Arkansas steel mills. Today, Nucor operates 5 facilities in my state and employs 2,300 people. The investments made by Nucor and other companies here today are the reason why Northeast Arkansas will soon be the top steel-producing region in the country. Mr. Topalian is leading Nucor through a transformation as it invests in both its core steelmaking operations and steel-related businesses in the supply chain. Today, he's joined by his family, his wife Kim, and daughters Isabella and Sophia. Thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to hearing your perspective on the state of the steel industry. Mr. Topalian, you are recognized.
Chairman Crawford and Vice Chairman Mrvan, on behalf of Nucor Corporation's more than 31,000 team members, thank you for the opportunity to speak with all of you today about the state of the American steel industry and the vital role we are playing in building our nation's green and digital economies. My name is Leon Topalian. I'm the Chair, President, and CEO of Nucor Corporation. The American steel industry is coming off 2 incredible years where we experienced robust demand for our products across a range of end-use markets, and we have tremendous opportunities in front of us. Policies adopted by Congress in recent years with bipartisan support have helped to create an environment where our teammates can thrive. Members of the Steel Caucus have been at the forefront for advocating for these policies, and we thank you. Vigorous enforcement of our nation's trade laws, coupled with pro-growth tax policies, have limited the impact of unfairly traded imports and have unleashed a wave of investment by this domestic industry. Since the beginning of 2020, Nucor is now more than 2/3 of the way through a $14 billion investment CapEx plan that's going to double our earnings growth from pre-pandemic levels. We recently started up a new state-of-the-art plate mill in Kentucky and have announced the addition of new steel mills in West Virginia and North Carolina. We've also added new capabilities at several of our existing steel mills that position us to meet the demand for steel that will be generated by public and private investments in infrastructure, clean energy, and advanced manufacturing facilities producing semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and EV batteries. For more than 50 years, Nucor has been built on a sustainable model of recycling steel to produce new steel and steel products. Today, as the largest recycler of any material in the Western Hemisphere, we continue to push recycled steel into products never previously imagined. Our new plate mill in Kentucky will be among only a few globally and the only American mill capable of manufacturing at scale the heavy gauge plate for offshore wind towers and monopiles. We strongly believe that our nation's clean energy infrastructure must be built with sustainable American steel. Unfortunately, recent guidance from the Treasury Department on the IRA's domestic content bonus credit threatens to gut the incentives applicable to iron and steel supply chains for wind energy. I hope we can count on this caucus to ensure that federal government investments in renewable energy projects support American production and American workers. Electric arc furnaces have led the way towards a greener steel industry, and scrap-based EAF production is far less carbon intensive and more energy efficient than traditional extractive steelmaking. And because we have continued to invest and innovate, America's recycling-based EAF producers can now make all types of steel, including heavy gauge plate and advanced high strength and exposed automotive grades of steel. As our governments negotiate the global arrangement on sustainable steel and aluminum and considers what it means to buy clean, and clearly defining sustainable or green steel has never been more important. The American steel industry is the cleanest in the world among industrialized countries. And make no mistake, this has happened as a result of EAF technologies steadily replacing high emissions extractive steelmaking over the last 3 decades. Today, more than 70% of steel produced in the U.S. is made by electric arc furnaces, and that will continue to grow in the coming years. This massive growth in sustainable steel did not happen as a result of any government regulations or subsidies, but by simply letting the market work. Companies like Nucor have consistently and strategically used our own profits to grow our company and reward our teammates, customers, and shareholders. In contrast, our international competitors continue to produce unrelenting amounts of the dirtiest steel on the planet, often subsidized by their governments. For example, in each of the last 4 years, China has produced more than 1 billion tons of high-emission steel from integrated mills and extractive steelmaking, and continues to be built not only in China, but also in India, Southeast Asia, and elsewhere. We will win if our nation is truly seeking to use the cleanest steel to build our economy. As governments and industries we serve look to reduce their own carbon footprints through procurement and trade policy, we believe the approach must be transparent and data-driven. That is why we support the Global Steel Climate Council's single standard approach to measuring and reporting carbon emissions. This proposal uses a single science-based standard that's focused on carbon footprint of the steel product, regardless of the technology used to produce it. This is the best way to continue driving investment and innovation. Bipartisan policymaking has been essential to creating the economic conditions conducive to investment and growth in our industry. We appreciate the leadership and the support of this Steel Caucus and ask that each of you continue to lead the way in addressing policy changes that we've shared today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I now recognize Mr. Mrvan to make the introduction of our next witness.
Thank you. Lourenco Goncalves has been Chairman, President, and Chief Executive Officer of Cleveland-Cliffs since August of 2014. And he was recently elected to serve as Chairman of the American Iron and Steel Institute. In that time, he has led the company through a major strategic initiative transforming Cleveland-Cliffs into the largest flat-rolled steel company and the largest iron-ore pellet producer in the United States. I will also note that Cleveland-Cliffs operates 2 mills in Northwest Indiana and employs thousands of steelworkers in my district. Mr. Goncalves has testified numerous times before the Steel Caucus, and it is my pleasure to welcome him today. Lourenco.
Good morning, members of the Steel Caucus. I'm Lourenco Goncalves, Chairman, President, and CEO of Cleveland-Cliffs. I'd like to start my testimony addressing Cleveland-Cliffs' progress towards substantially reducing carbon dioxide emissions from our operations and our significantly positive impact on our clients, particularly the automotive sector. In 2022, Cliffs achieved a remarkable 32% reduction in absolute Scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions as compared to a 2017 baseline. These numbers are audited by Deloitte & Touche, which I believe should be the standard going forward. I believe that emissions should be treated like GAAP for public companies. And that's why we brought Deloitte & Touche to the conversation. Our goal for 2030 was a reduction of 25%. Due to our decision made in 2018 to spend $1 billion to build a state-of-the-art direct reduction plant, and then to use our low emissions direct reduced iron in the form of HBI as feedstock in our blast furnaces, Cleveland-Cliffs was able to not only exceed the target by a large margin, but also to get there in 2022, 8 years ahead of schedule. We don't know of any other company in steel or any other field in the world that was able to reduce Scope 1 and 2 by 32% in just 3 years. Just last month, on May 8, 2023, Cleveland-Cliffs completed a successful hydrogen trial at our Middletown Works blast furnace, injecting hydrogen into all 22 years of the furnace for half a day. This was the first trial of its kind in the Western Hemisphere. This groundbreaking use of hydrogen as an iron reductant is a massive step toward the continued decarbonization of the superior steels produced by the blast furnace BOF route and utilized by the automotive industry. As we proved in our trial, we can use massive amounts of hydrogen as reductant, replacing coke and consequently replacing CO2 generation with H2O generation. CO2 is greenhouse gas. H2O is water. We now only need hydrogen at scale and at a cost-competitive level. Cleveland-Cliffs is working to bring about a clean hydrogen economy through our participation in 2 Midwestern hydrogen hubs. Our significant offtake will serve to resolve the chicken and egg dilemma around hydrogen. As a major consumer of the hydrogen to be produced by the hubs, we will enable the use of hydrogen by other carbon-intensive industries, particularly the automotive sector. Please keep in mind, hydrogen-powered vehicles are a very real alternative to battery electric vehicles. Some of our automotive clients, big names, are already working on the hydrogen alternative, in addition to their efforts on electrification of the fleet. To that end, in the United States, Cleveland-Cliffs is the sole producer of both grain-oriented electrical steels, we call GOES, and no-oriented electrical steels, we call NOES. GOES is used in distribution and power transformers, and NOES is used in the most highly efficient electric motors, including electric vehicles. Last week, a number of trade groups sent a letter to President Biden regarding alleged limited availability of domestically produced electrical steels. Because of the interest of this caucus this caucus has taken in the continued production of electrical steels, I must set the record straight in relation to this letter, which is just plain wrong. I addressed this caucus in March of 2020, just days before Cleveland-Cliffs finalized its acquisition of AK Steel Corporation. At that time, AK Steel, then the sole producer of electrical steels in the United States, was planning to close its electrical steel producing operations, Butler Works in Pennsylvania and Zanesville Works in Ohio. In early 2020, the electrical steel market had been decimated by imports of both GOES and NOES, as well as transformer components called laminations and cores that are simply cut and stacked pieces of GOES. Dumping from bad foreign players was forcing the closure of the sole producer of electrical steels in the United States. Such a closure would have been devastating to 1,500 men and women who work at Butler and Zanesville, most of whom are represented by the United Auto Workers, and would have led the United States to be exclusively reliant on foreign countries for the material needed to maintain and enhance the capabilities of the US grid. Despite the fact that we're very public about the serious challenges facing these operations, not one of these same trade groups took a stand on our behalf, nor did they raise any concerns about limited availability of electrical steels at that time. In March 2020, I pledged in front of this Steel Caucus that Cleveland-Cliffs would keep Butler and Zanesville open and make investments if the federal government addressed these dumped and subsidized imports.
Mr. Goncalves, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up, if you would, please.
I'm going to finish, if you allow me, Chairman Crawford. This is very relevant for the United States of America. I would appreciate if you could allow me to conclude my half a page that I'm missing here.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the great work of leaders such as Congressman Troy Balderson, Mike Kelly, Mars Captor, Senator Sherrod Brown, Senator Bob Casey, former Senator Rob Portman, and others were able to turn around both Butler and Zanesville. In the past couple of years, Cliffs has invested approximately $50 million in these two facilities in order to increase production of both GOES and electric vehicle grade NOES. In fact, Cleveland-Cliffs is currently producing more GOES than our customers are able to receive and process. So much so that last week we sent 2,000 tons of GOES coils to an off-site warehouse because clients can't take it. While our clients in the transforming industry are experiencing production issues resulting in extended transformer lead times, those problems relate to their labor shortages and their shortage of other materials. These problems have nothing to do with the supply of electrical steels. If electrical steels imports are permitted to flow in unrestrained, the continued production of both GOES and NOES in the US will be in jeopardy, threatening US national security investment in grid modernization and vehicle electrification needed to facilitate continued economic-wide greenhouse gas reductions. I count on the continued support of the Steel Caucus to maintain our US electrical steel production capabilities. Thank you for allowing me to finish, Chairman Crawford, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, sir. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Barbara Smith, Chairman of the Board and CEO of Commercial Metals Company. Mrs. Smith is here testifying not only on behalf of CMC, but also on behalf of the Steel Manufacturers Association, one of the largest steel industry trade associations in the nation, which represent over 75% of the United States' total steel production. Ms. Smith joined CMC in 2011 as Senior Vice President and CFO before being promoted to COO in 2016 and now CEO as of 2017. In addition to her distinguished career and time at CMC, Ms. Smith serves on the board of directors for Comerica Incorporated and is actively involved with community organizations such as serving on the Dallas and Tampa boards of the American Heart Association. Commercial Metals began in Dallas over 100 years ago, where it has evolved into a multi-billion-dollar company producing sustainable, low-cost, high-quality steel that delivers a diverse portfolio of products all around the world. As one of the few women to lead a Fortune 500 company and the only woman on our panel today, Ms. Smith brings unique and outstanding experience and perspective to our forum today, and I appreciate you being here and to hear your insight on the state of the steel industry. Ms. Smith, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you and good morning. As noted, I'm Barbara Smith, Chairman of the Board and Chief Executive Officer for CMC, a Texas-based Fortune 500 company with over 12,000 employees around the globe. I'm honored to testify today on behalf of CMC and the Steel Manufacturers Association, which CMC co-founded over 30 years ago. Today, SMA is America's largest steel industry trade association in terms of steel production represented, industry employment, and overall financial contributions to the U.S. economy. First, I'd like to thank the Congressional Steel Caucus co-chairs, Congressman Rick Crawford and Congressman Frank Mrvan, as well as all members of the caucus for your unrelenting advocacy on behalf of the U.S. steel industry and our hardworking employees across our nation. We have not made the progress we have without your leadership and support. SMA members' companies represent over 75% of America's total steel production. Our members use clean, energy-efficient electric arc furnace steelmaking technology, which uses recycled metal as a primary raw material, producing the cleanest steel in the world. Steel is the single most recycled material in the world and is infinitely recyclable, creating the circular economy required for low-emission steel production. CMC was founded 108 years ago as a metals recycling company and has grown to be one of the most innovative and environmentally advanced steelmakers in the world. Each year, we gather, sort, upgrade, and transform almost 20 billion pounds of scrap metal into new steel products, which forms the backbone of our nation's infrastructure. Steel can be found everywhere, from the places we live and work to the roads we travel, as well as the vehicles that protect our soldiers, making steel a critical part of our economy and national security. By utilizing our modern, efficient, and low-emission micromill and mini mills, the steel that CMC produces has at least 75% less embodied carbon than the exact same steel product produced by traditional steelmaking technology. Today's EAFs can and do produce a full range of steel products, products that people wrongly claim could never be produced in lower emissions EAFs. At CMC, our products are substantially lower in embodied carbon than both integrated producers and most EAF steel producers globally due to our continuous investment in innovative new technologies. And we continue to make improvements to our world-class position every day. However, as we sit here today, I can't help but be reminded of where the industry stood just 5 short years ago. It was on the brink of an economic crisis due to the unprecedented volumes of unfairly traded imports that were flooding our borders. Steel companies were laying off employees, reducing production, and closing operations just to survive. The industry filed numerous trade cases with mixed results as countries continuously found ways to circumvent our outdated trade laws. The government stepped up and implemented the Section 232 tariffs, which leveled the playing field against the unfairly traded imports. The rationale was clear. A strong steel industry is critical to our nation's infrastructure, national security, and economic success. It remains a huge risk for the U.S. to rely on countries like China, Russia, and others to provide the steel our infrastructure and national security requires. Thanks to the actions, the U.S. steel industry rebounded and responded by investing over $15 billion in capacity expansion, which has led to the hiring of thousands of additional employees, put Americans back to work with high-paying manufacturing jobs. Recently, our industry has announced an additional $9 billion in new investments over the next several years. This new, efficient green melting capacity is electric arc furnace-based, and EAFs will soon constitute about 80% or more of U.S. production, while the rest of the world remains 70% reliant on iron ore-based integrated steelmaking. These investments in production capacity will ensure that we have the steel to support our country's needs for infrastructure, manufacturing, energy, and national security. At CMC, over the past 5 years, we have commissioned a new micromill in Oklahoma. In addition, we are in the process of commissioning a first-of-its-kind merchant and rebar combination micromill in Arizona, and have recently announced the construction of a new micromill in West Virginia, totaling approximately 1.5 million tons of new steel production capacity and $1.5 billion in capital investment. Your actions have provided the industry with a solid foundation that will continue to bring high-quality manufacturing jobs back to America. But our work is not done. We continue to be threatened by imports that undermined our recent investments in the U.S. economy. China continues to expand its Belt and Road Initiative, investing in steel production and processing in countries outside China to circumvent U.S. trade law. The 232 tariffs have been weakened by the tariff rate quota mechanisms implemented with the EU, Japan, and the UK. The new global arrangement, if not implemented properly, has the potential to allow high-emission steel imports to enter the U.S. tariff-free. At the same time, we are seeing massive surges of imports from our southern border, which is not in compliance with the USMCA trade agreement. We are at a critical juncture where we need up-to-date, common-sense trade policy that looks out for the hardworking American steelworker. The United States' global adversaries and even some allies are taking advantage of our outdated trade laws. We need action now before we are faced with the same situation we found ourselves back in 2018. I urge each of you to support the Level the Playing Field 2.0 legislation, which is being presented, I believe, today, into the House and Senate. We are doing our part by investing in the industry's future, and we must work together to provide the necessary tools to ensure a successful future for our steelworkers and their families. I thank each of you for the opportunity to testify and look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. I recognize Mr. Mrvan for introduction of our next witness.
Roy Houseman serves the legislative director for the United Steelworkers, where he has worked for over a decade. In this role, Mr. Houseman oversees the USW legislative priorities and has a policy focus on the steel sector, international trade, and retirement security. He has testified at multiple anti-dumping and countervailing duty steel cases before the International Trade Commission. Prior to his work at the USW, Mr. Houseman was a local union president and city council member in Montana, where he worked at a paper mill as an operator. After the mill's closure in 2010, Mr. Houseman completed a Master's of Public Administration degree from the University of Montana with the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program, which has aided him in his current career. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Houseman to represent the USW at today's forum and recognize him for his statement. Mr. Houseman.
Thank you, Steel Caucus co-chairs Crawford and Mrvan. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today at the State of the Steel Industry Forum. United Steelworkers President Tom Conway gives his regards and was unfortunately unable to attend today's event. The United Steelworkers is the largest union in the steel sector, and we work closely with the industry, including many present here today, to ensure that the domestic steel sector is strong, vibrant, and provides good American jobs. My remarks will focus on how we can maintain a level playing field for America's steelworkers. This will require the continued engagement of the Steel Caucus on issues facing workers and industry, and my remarks will focus on the Section 232 tariffs and the global arrangement in steel, the need to address the surge of steel imports in Mexico, why we need to update our trade laws, and finally ensuring taxpayer dollars maximize job creation with Build America, Buy America implementation. Regarding the global arrangement and the Steel 232, USW remains committed to maintaining the 232 tariff relief and urges Congress to support a successful negotiation with the European Union on a global arrangement on non-market excess steel capacity and carbon intensity. As you've heard today, quality work on tariff policy has led to competition on technology as opposed to competition with foreign adversaries in trade. The never-ceasing growth of excess foreign steel capacity demands continued defense of our domestic industry, vital to our national security. According to the OECD, over 630 million tons of excess steel capacity exists today, with another 166 million tons of new steelmaking capacity coming online, primarily in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. This is why non-market excess steel capacity and carbon-intensive steelmaking should be properly accounted for when entering to the US and European markets. US workers and their employers should not face dirty, non-market economy, unfairly priced steel when our companies invested time and money to reduce their emissions, as you're hearing today. The Steel Caucus should work closely with the relevant congressional committees in the Biden administration to ensure that the global arrangement will promote our economic and national security. The union wishes to thank the Steel Caucus for its work on the surge of steel imports from Mexico. As you are aware, steel imports from Mexico have increased 72% last year. It appears the Mexican-based importers are using the country's duty-free status under USMCA to permit melted imported steel products from multiple countries to enter the US through Mexico. The union has been in close contact with the Biden administration regarding this issue, and the dialogue is beginning with the Mexican government. But your advocacy will help to foster a solution sooner. Much of what I have discussed so far highlights the need for continued strong enforcement of our trade laws. The domestic steel industry has benefited from trade law reforms in 2015 called Leveling the Playing Field Act. However, we have seen new threats rise up since then. This is where Leveling the Playing Field Act 2.0, introduced by Representative Sewell from Alabama and Bill Johnson from Ohio, will be important for members of the Steel Caucus to co-sponsor and urge passage. We hope that Congress will act quickly to move Leveling the Playing Field Act 2.0 through the legislative process, but the union will continue to use the tools we have in the meantime. USW will use trade enforcement to ensure that the US will not be the dumping ground for other countries' steel products. 300 workers in Weirton, West Virginia, they have pink slips in their hands, while firms in 8 countries, including China, appear to be sending below-market tinplate into the US. Finally, we need to ensure that our federal taxpayer dollars are supporting American manufacturing jobs. The bipartisan infrastructure law has meant additional work at US-represented iron foundries like Mueller Fire Hydrant Product Manufacturer in Albertville, Alabama, where USW Local 65 represents over 450 workers. To build on this, the Congressional Steel Caucus should encourage agencies to speed up Build America, Buy America implementation by moving from the use of blanket waivers to narrow, transparent waivers. The kind of progress that will result in more stories like Albertville will create new, good-paying and union jobs in additional industries across the country. The Steel Caucus has a storied history of bipartisan cooperation to defend American workers and ensure the enactment of policies that maintain a strong domestic industry. The United Steelworkers hopes you will continue that tradition by enforcing and updating our trade laws and improving domestic procurement policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Houseman. It's my pleasure to introduce Rich Fruehauf, Senior Vice President and Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer for U.S. Steel Corporation. Mr. Fruehauf joined U.S. Steel in 2014. In his role, he is responsible for creating and driving U.S. Steel's strategy and sustainability priorities to achieve profitable growth. He also has responsibility for developing policy and methods that will support U.S. Steel's future by aligning business sustainability and organization opportunities. In addition to his role as Senior VP, Mr. Fruehauf is chair of the U.S. Steel Foundation, is a member of the Fellow of American Bar Association, and as a native of Pittsburgh, serves on the board of directors of the American Red Cross of Southwestern Pennsylvania. Also headquartered in Pittsburgh, of course, is U.S. Steel, one of the most historic steel manufacturers and organizations in the United States. However, U.S. Steel is moving new investments to the Mid-South, constructing a mini mill in Fairfield, Alabama, and acquiring the mini mill leader Big River Steel in my district. I was impressed to learn that Big River was awarded the first ever responsible steel site certification in North America for sustainability practices. My staff and I had a chance to visit the Big River development last October, and let me just say, Mississippi County and Northeast Arkansas is open for business in steel production. Mr. Fruehauf, thank you for being here. I look forward to your testimony. Appreciate your contribution and dedication to U.S. Steel and to the steel industry. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Crawford and Vice Chairman Mrvan. On behalf of the over 22,000 men and women of U.S. Steel, thank you for the opportunity to join you all this morning. We appreciate the bipartisan caucus's leadership in supporting American steelmaking. From our iron ore mines in northern Minnesota to our integrated iron and steelmaking operations in Gary, Indiana, the Mon Valley outside Pittsburgh, Granite City, Illinois, and our electric arc furnaces in Fairfield, Alabama, and Osceola, Arkansas, U.S. Steel mines, melts, and makes steel in the USA, and we have been doing it for over 120 years. Steel is critical to our national and economic security, and it is critical to providing a foundation for the reshoring and homecoming of manufacturing. We need American-made steel to rebuild and supply American-made manufacturing. Global steel overcapacity and the actions of foreign governments and producers that feed overcapacity are a very real threat. This excess steelmaking in China and other countries distorts global steel trade flows. Our U.S. industry is investing to grow stronger, to create jobs, and to continue to meet our nation's needs. We cannot allow this to be undermined by overcapacity on unfairly traded imports. Strong trade enforcement and continuation of the Section 232 National Security Action on steel imports is critical. As Chairman Crawford noted, U.S. Trade Representative Tai and the administration have stood strong on the WTO's erroneous decision regarding the permissibility of the 232 National Security Action, and it's gratifying to see two successive administrations stand up for American steelmaking. We thank the caucus as well for its support of the industry's anti-dumping and countervailing duty cases and confronting unfair trade. We also appreciate your attention and focus as the United States and the European Union discuss a potential global arrangement on steel overcapacity and decarbonization. A successful outcome and agreement would be one that ensures that America makes the green steel our nation needs for the electric vehicles, for our power grid, and for a clean economy. The United States should never become dependent on foreign steel or allow any agreement that hinders American steel innovation and the production of cleaner, greener steel. Since last year's Steel Caucus hearing, U.S. Steel has been advancing our Best for All strategy with large and sustainable steel investments. As you noted, sir, in Osceola, Arkansas, we have approximately $3 billion of next-generation, high sustainable and technologically advanced steel mill production under construction. With this project startup next year, the sophisticated new steelmaking facility, in combination with the existing Big River Steel Complex, will form a 6.3 million ton mega mill. We're getting rid of the mini mill term. We're gonna call mega mills from now on. Capable of providing many of the most advanced and sustainable steels in North America. And as you noted, sir, Big River Steel is the first LEED certified steel mill in the United States and was the first certified after an independent audit against 13 principles by Responsible Steel. In March, U.S. Steel announced its new electrical steel product known as Indux, and we will begin production at Big River Steel this summer with the commissioning of our new non-grain-oriented electrical steel line. Indux electrical steel is a very wide, ultra-thin, and lightweight steel having all the magnetic properties necessary for the newest generation electric vehicle motors, as well as existing and future industrial motors, electric motors. By producing Indux in the United States, U.S. Steel is making a significant investment, $450 million, in American jobs and bolstering the resilience of our country's domestic supply chain to expand the supply of non-grain-oriented electrical steel. In Gary, Indiana, we had the pleasure of hosting Vice Chair Mrvan to see our $60 million investment in a pig iron caster, which is now operational, harnessing the iron ore mined in our Minnesota mines to produce inputs for our electric arc furnace steel production. And we were honored, sir, to have you at the groundbreaking event for this facility, and we look forward to a future visit to show this facility in red-hot production. In Minnesota, we've invested, and our construction continues on a $150 million investment in a new direct reduced iron grade pellet facility. This project will help diversify the iron range to serve electric arc furnace steelmaking. We look forward to its startup in the months ahead. And at the Mon Valley Works near Pittsburgh, where we spend approximately $100 million a year just on environmental compliance, we are pleased to be part of Allegheny County achieving 3 straight years of meeting the federal national ambient air quality standards. Environmental stewardship is a core priority at U.S. Steel, and we actively focus on environmental excellence to strengthen awareness, education, and engagement efforts. U.S. Steel is the first American headquartered steelmaker to publicly announce a 2050 net zero carbon emissions goal. Programs enacted in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and in the Inflation Reduction Act will help the U.S. compete in the global race to decarbonize steelmaking. Developing and deploying needed technologies requires collaboration and public-private partnerships between business, government, academia, and NGOs. We encourage Congress to continue to develop solutions to boost American competitiveness and manufacturing. Thank you again for giving U.S. Steel the opportunity to participate in this hearing. I look forward to today's discussion. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Fruehauf, and I recognize Mr. Mrvan to introduce our final witness.
Andy Annakin is the Executive Vice President and Chief Commercial Officer of the Bull Moose Tube and also serves as Chairman of the Committee on Pipe and Tube Imports. Mr. Annakin has over 30 years of sales leadership experience in the metals industry and has worked for both mills and distributors. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Annakin and his daughter Chloe, who's joining him, who's proud to be here with him to join us for our discussion today. Mr. Annakin.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Crawford, Vice Chairman Mrvan, and distinguished members of the Congressional Steel Caucus. Thank you for inviting me to testify. My name is Andy Annakin. I am the Chief Commercial Officer of Bull Moose Tube, one of the nation's leading producers of carbon steel tube products, headquartered in Chesterfield, Missouri. Bull Moose employs 580 teammates across facilities in Arizona, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, and Ohio. Our company's newest investment is a 350,000 ton per year structural and sprinkler pipe mill located on the campus of Steel Dynamics in Sinton, Texas. Our company is proud to be part of an innovative domestic steel pipe and tube industry that has been a driving force in our nation's manufacturing for over a century. The other domestic producers have also made significant investments in facilities over the past few years in Arkansas, Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, Oklahoma, Texas, and Wyoming. This morning, I am pleased to appear as chairman of the Committee on Pipe and Tube Imports, the nation's leading trade association of the U.S. pipe and tube industry. CPTI members make an array of carbon and stainless steel tube, pipe, and fittings products. Today, our member companies are in 32 states and 132 congressional districts with 38,000 employees across the country. The industry is an essential customer of the nation's steel industry. In fact, many of the companies on today's panel with me are suppliers of flat-rolled and long products to the pipe and tube industry. Historically, the industry has been challenged by unfairly traded imports of pipe and tube from across the globe. Today, there are still 85 anti-dumping and countervailing duty in place which cover our pipe and tube products. Our industry was at rock bottom in 2017 when imports took 2/3 of the market. The imposition of the Steel Section 232 program, along with existing anti-dumping and countervailing duty orders, directly caused import penetration to begin to fall. The industry supports Section 232 and urges the Steel Caucus to continue its engagement with the administration to retain the program along with properly enforced quotas to level the playing field for the industry. In the past 2 years, imports have slowly crept back, and at the end of 2022, import penetration was back up to 40% of the market. We do thank the caucus for sending a letter to the administration in May on this very important matter. The CPTI is also engaged with the administration on the U.S.-EU dialogue on the global arrangement to reduce carbon emissions in global steel production and restore market-oriented conditions. As these negotiations move forward, we are aware that the EU announced in April of this year that they will institute a carbon border adjustment mechanism in January 2026, with reporting commencing this year. This new policy covers aluminum, cement, steel, fertilizers, hydrogen, and electricity. As reported by the EU, and I quote, "This is a landmark tool that will put a price on the carbon emitted during the production of carbon-intensive goods that are entering the EU." At the recent CPTI annual meeting, members discussed this new EU policy, and we all agreed that Congress should explore legislation that would level the playing field on entries of high carbon imports by enacting legislation that imposes a cost to imports of high carbon emitting steel products. This is necessary to prevent carbon leakage in the form of an import surge into the U.S. when the EU, UK, and Canada impose these carbon tariffs. Our industry makes a number of products for the renewable sector, including torque tube used in solar trackers and other steel products used in the installation of solar projects. The Department of Treasury's IRS issued guidance earlier in May on bonus tax credits as they pertain to the procurement of domestically manufactured products, including products made of iron and steel. We are concerned that there may be a difference in interpretation as to the requirements for procuring U.S.-made steel products and would welcome engagement from the caucus to inquire with Treasury, Department of Energy, and the White House for clarification. As the Steel Caucus moves ahead in the 118th Congress, we would like to highlight a few of our priorities. We're a strong supporter of the trade laws, and we include the support for leveling the Playing Act 2.0 that's been mentioned earlier, that may be introduced as soon as today. The Trade Cheats Act, focusing on identifying parties that purposely evade existing AD and CVD duties, and provide remedial benefits to impacted industries. We support the enforcement of the Buy America program for the national infrastructure projects and of the tax credit provision of the Inflation Reduction Act for domestic steel products. Finally, support full funding in fiscal year 2024 for the U.S. trade agencies charged with administering the U.S. unfair trade laws and customs enforcement. For over 4 decades, the Congressional Steel Caucus has paved the way in the development and enactment of legislation that has led to a stronger, stable, and innovative domestic steel industry. Our industry remains resilient, and with your ongoing leadership and support, we can continue to grow. The CPTI looks forward to closely working with you in the 118th Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the witnesses. I'll now recognize myself for questioning, recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Topalian, as I said in my opening statement, Vice Chair Mrvan and I recently spearheaded a letter urging President Biden to immediately begin consultations with Mexico to address the surge in Mexican steel imports. Has the industry seen any progress on that front? What do you recommend the federal government does further?
Well, I appreciate the question, and again, I thank you for your letter and urging the administration to take action. I'd love to tell you we've seen a reduction, but we've not. The surge of imports from our southern border continues to infiltrate in the United States, affecting the investments that many of us on this panel are making today. That's got to be countered, and so we are urging you and the entire Steel Caucus to continue to put remedies in place that don't allow the Mexican steel industry to take advantage of the trade policies that are in place and that are in violation of that.
You said in your statement that recent guidance from the Treasury Department on the Inflation Reduction Act's domestic content bonus credit threatens to gut the incentives applicable to iron and steel supply chains for wind energy. I'm a strong proponent of Buy America policies that require steel produced in the United States to be used on federally supported infrastructure projects, and renewable energy projects are no exception. Can you tell me more about the guidance and how the Steel Caucus can help ensure the federal government investments in renewable energy products that support American production and American workers?
Yes, sir. I appreciate the question, Mr. Chairman. Nucor supports the IRA and all that it contains in driving and innovation, economic growth, job creation here in the United States. As we think about very specifically in offshore wind, the Treasury's initial guidance deemed the offshore wind appropriately to be an iron and steel product. However, it excluded the monopile segment from that legislation, so that is excluded, allowing foreign steels to come into the United States for that section. It's initially based, and I think Treasury got that wrong in not understanding that Nucor just started a plant up in Brandenburg, Kentucky in December of last year that produces all the needs for the offshore industry, including the monopile section. So again, we'd ask that this caucus continue to urge the administration and Treasury to relook at that and include the monopiles within that piece of legislation for that tax credit for the wind developers that are going to build those offshore.
Thank you. Mr. Fruehauf, you mentioned that the new electric steel line in Arkansas will be operational this year. Can you tell us more about the importance of that facility and how it supports domestic supply chains?
Yes, thank you, sir. We are producing, or will be producing soon, about 200,000 tons annually of non-grain oriented electrical steel, ultra-thin gauges. That line will be supporting the development of our electric vehicle fleet in this country. It will have very high quality and great properties for electric motors. We hear a lot of talk about electric batteries for electric vehicles, but you need a motor to take that power that's stored in the battery and turn it into motion. That's where the non-grain oriented electrical steel comes into play. And most of the non-grain oriented electrical steel used today in the United States is imported. It comes from places like Russia, China, Korea, and Japan. And so we've invested $450 million to be able to produce this key material for the future electrification of our supply chain and our transport sector.
Thank you. Ms. Smith, CMC, of course, makes a variety of products to be used in numerous projects. How has CMC and members of SMA used innovation to provide the products that the market demands over the years, and how will it meet the demands of the future?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to reference back to the technology I mentioned, micromill technology. CMC co-developed that technology about 15 years ago. There are a number of energy and other benefits associated with that technology. It is now being used by other members of the panel here today, and it is the greenest, cleanest technology in the world. As I said, we are now commissioning a next version of the micromill technology, it was first introduced to produce rebar. It now will be producing rebar and merchant, first of the kind in the world. It's over $600 million investment. And this is what keeps the United States ahead of the rest of the world in terms of clean steelmaking technology. This technology we're introducing in Arizona will also have a new power system that will allow us to directly connect to renewable energy sources, saving an additional 10% in energy consumption. So I just urge the committee to, again, support the innovation of the U.S. steel industry, because without protection from unfairly traded and circumvented material, it makes it really, really difficult for us to commit these kinds of investments in innovation.
Thank you. Mr. Mrvan, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I think it's extremely important for us to recognize the number of families and employees that all of you stand up for, and what you're fighting for is to make sure that people have jobs. So I want to appreciate that. And it's our job to make sure that there are trade policies and domestic policies that advance the steel industry, because it's a national security issue and what you do every single day. Mr. Houseman, can you tell me the importance of level the playing field? Just hone in on everyday talk on why that piece of legislation is so important to your hundreds of thousands of members.
Yes, thank you for the question, Representative Mrvan. The issue here of third country subsidization, which is just not something a regular worker thinks about on a day-to-day basis, but for a worker who sees imports come in from a foreign country and undercut their ability to produce steel for the companies here at this table, it's this idea that if China invests a whole bunch of money in a brand new plant in Vietnam or in anywhere else across the globe, and then that company then dumps into the U.S. market, the Commerce Department should be able to account for those subsidies. And currently they are unable to, and you guys, through Representative Sewell's Leveling Playing Field Act, they'll be able to actually account for that, so that when the companies and the union work together on a trade case, we'll be able to ensure the proper accounting for that amount of subsidization occurs. Which is, for the difference between keeping a plant open and, dealing with issues related to the layoff. And so that's from a 101 perspective, it's about making steel.
And thank you very much. And it goes duly noted that the emotion that you showed of the real life of what it means when people get pink slips in everyday America, and how that is important, and what we do with trade policy and how that impacts people's lives. Mr. Goncalves, can you tell me a little bit about the transformer issue that you have in the future with the Department of Energy and that issue, and how you're viewing that and what that looks like?
Thanks, Congressman Mrvan. It's another phase of the same problem that we continue to face with unfairly traded imports. 3 years ago, the Steel Caucus played a very, very strong role in not allowing the sole producer of electrical steels to shut down. And we prevailed, and we invested money, and we created jobs, and we hired a lot of people ahead of retirements to train people to be able to operate once the older generation had retired. And now we're ready, and we are doing, and we are producing. And now came out of the left field a crazy idea of replacing silicon steels, grain-oriented electrical steels in transformers, which is 95% of the market in the United States, and is not very different throughout the entire world, with amorphous metal. That's a thing that's not even produced in the United States. Just because the efficiency of amorphous metal is allegedly 99%, and silicon steels are only 97.7%. So by 2027, we no longer should have regular, traditional electrical steel transformers in this country. That would be another way to open the door, open the floodgates for imported steel to come to the United States. So we have to stop that, because that's, among other things, would impair the ability to upgrade the electrical grid that's so important for everything that we have been talking here.
I thank you very much. And just in closing again, in 30 seconds, how important it is of all of you who are here today and the families that you represent. I bring with me often a grade school friend of mine who has an ancillary business. It's Crown Engineering, Repair, and Manufacturing, but it's a great story. Went to Purdue, became an engineer, worked in the steel mills in Gary, Indiana, and made his own company and employs 75 people. His business depends upon your success and our success. So again, I want to thank you, because that's the American dream, and also the national security component that you add to the United States of America, and all your hard work to reshore domestic manufacturing and your belief in the American domestic manufacturing. I thank you very much. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Dr. Joyce, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for our panelists for being here today. Please recognize that the commitment to U.S. steel exists today in the United States Congress. As part of my role as the Vice Chairman of the Environment, Manufacturing, and Critical Materials Subcommittee on Energy and Commerce, I am very concerned about grid reliability and maintaining domestic supply chains for critical steel components. Mr. Fruehauf, in your opening statement, you said, and we are listening, that American steel is necessary to provide American manufacturing. I couldn't agree more. Mr. Fruehauf, would you discuss the importance of electric steel to grid and to national security implications if we were to lose the ability to manufacture this critical material domestically?
Yes, sir, thank you. Well, I should note that I've been with U.S. Steel about 8.5 years, but prior to that, I worked at Westinghouse Electric Company, a nuclear technology supplier, so I've spent a lot of time on electricity issues and grid and power issues. You couldn't be more spot on, sir. The grid today is not in a good place. You know, we talk about infrastructure and investing in bridges and roads and rail. We need to invest in the electricity grid and transmission network just to keep it stable today. And then when you think about the electrification of transport, more electric vehicles, more electricity for power generation, and it's the transmission's the weak link. And so the electrical steels that we've talked about, non-grain oriented and the grain oriented, they're absolutely critical for the reliability of the grid to handle the existing load on it and the growth that's expected as we electrify our economy. And the sorry situation is a lot of this electrical steel comes from places like Russia, China, Korea, Japan, not that much in the United States. And I think that's where, if we're gonna have a secure supply chain, we need to onshore and produce more electrical steel here. Because all these great visions of electrifying the economy and the transportation network don't work if we don't have a reliable transmission network.
And the stability of that grid, I agree, is absolutely dependent on a strong domestic steel production. Mr. Fruehauf, looking ahead for the next 5 years, this is a two-part question. Do you believe that the American steel industry's primary opportunities, what are the primary opportunities and what are your primary challenges?
Well, I think, sir, you've heard most of us talk about this global arrangement and the decarbonization of the steel sector. So as that's occurring globally, there's a race going on, and you can see it in Europe. We have a footprint that includes a facility in Europe, so we have a front row seat to what's happening in the EU. But there is a lot of governmental subsidization in Europe for green steel making, because I think the Europeans recognize, and other regions are doing the same thing. In Canada, for example, the Canadians are subsidizing the decarbonization of their steel industry as well, because I think these governments recognize the importance of steel. It's the foundation of all manufacturing. The multiplier effect, when you think about job creation, Mr. Mrvan just talked about it, right? It's not just the direct jobs, it's all the additional jobs that support steel and manufacturing in general. So the decarbonization of the steel industry is both a risk and an opportunity. We already have here in the United States an advantage because 2/3 of our steel production, about 70%, is electric arc furnace today, which is much lower greenhouse gas intense than the blast furnace route. The Europeans, it's flipped. It's about 2/3 is blast furnace, 1/3 electric arc furnace. And with what they're going through with their electricity and power generation challenges, the issues they've had with natural gas supply, if you outsource your gas supply to Russia, you're asking for trouble, and they got it. We have an advantage there as we race to see which industry can decarbonize and win the race to supply green steel, not just domestically, but to markets outside of the United States. So it's both a risk and an opportunity. I think the challenge is, as a lot of you know, to make sure that whatever arrangement is negotiated with the European Union and potentially with other partners later protects the basic elements of the 232. If you go back and read the 232 investigation the Commerce Department issued in 2017, everything they predicted is happening. All these investments that we're all talking about were predicted: modernization, cleaning up of the industry, investment in the United States. And that's why I think you'll see analysts today, some of the analysts in the on Wall Street and others who follow the steel sector say, we're on the edge of a great boom in steel in the United States. It could be a very great year or decade, actually, for steel production in the United States with all of the infrastructure spending that's coming, the Inflation Reduction Act. So we have a great opportunity. We just have to make sure in these trade agreements that are being negotiated, we don't give it away.
Thank you. My time has expired, and I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Ms. Budzinski, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Crawford and Co-Chairman Mrvan, for hosting this very important meeting. I appreciate that. And I want to say good morning to all of the panelists. I am going to spend most of my time allotted speaking to Mr. Fruehauf and U.S. Steel. Granite City, which I appreciate you mentioned in your opening comments, a town of 27,000, which is located, as you know, in the district I'm so honored to represent, is really a town that is synonymous with U.S. Steel. You opened your doors in 1878, making sheet iron, switching to steel in 1895. Generations of families have been raised at Granite City Steelworks. You're a union shop. And what that means is with a collective bargaining agreement with the United Steelworkers, you have helped to build the middle class in my home state in Illinois by providing good wages, benefits, and safe working conditions for working people for generations. Just the other week, I had the opportunity to meet with a constituent whose father and grandfather both worked at the mill, and that's how he was put through college, and he then went on to start his own healthcare business, which is profitable and now provides for his own family. And yet, despite years of good fortune and record profits of U.S. Steel, you're ready to be packed up and leave, leaving hundreds of families behind. The proposed sale to SunCoke is forecast to cut 1,000 jobs in the community of Granite City, which will be a death blow to the industrial community like Granite City. So the question that I have continued to ask myself is why? Why leave? Why does U.S. Steel choose to abandon high-skilled labor? Why would U.S. Steel be uninterested in pursuing the litany of tax credits? We've talked a lot today about the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill. You know, before I came to Congress, I got to work at the Office of Management and Budget. I was the chief of staff. I helped the president set up that Made in America office, and we're talking about how we all support Buy American. I was so proud to be a part of that, and I have no doubt that U.S. Steel has benefited from that. And so why are there no electric arc furnaces being built in Granite City, the home again of U.S. Steel since 1895? And I also want to note too, we shouldn't forget that SJ18, a lightweight hard steel used in automotive production, is only made in Granite City in the United States, and other mills have not been able to replicate its production. There are capabilities of high-grade production at Granite City no other integrated facility can match in the United States. So how could the answer be to get rid of these blast furnaces in Granite City? The answer to me is not surprising, and to many folks I think here, U.S. Steel, Mr. Fruehauf, I believe, has calculated moving the operations to right-to-work states to help their profit margins. Cheaper labor with fewer protections means an exit strategy out of the industrial Midwest. And I have to say, quite frankly, Granite City is not alone in this trend. We shouldn't stand for this. Mr. Fruehauf, I implore you and the rest of the U.S. Steel team that it is not too late to change your mind. Shortly, you will be hearing from my team as well as from my colleagues in many other states, which I just mentioned, where you've ceased investments on a wide range of options your company has to protect these workers and continue your legacy in this community. So, Mr. Fruehauf, I too am interested in seeing your company take the steps to protect our environment and make the next generation of U.S. Steel, but let's do it in Granite City. And I pledge I will be there every step of the way to ensure that you get as much help as you need from the federal government to make this feasible. Mr. Fruehauf, can you tell me why your company is choosing to not pursue these brand new tax credits at the Granite City location, despite the unique production capabilities and strong profits at this site?
Well, thank you, Congresswoman. As I think when we spoke earlier this year, and I'm happy to talk to you later about this as well, it is not possible to put an electric arc furnace facility into Granite City without raising the entire complex. So we could lay off a lot of steel workers for several years while we tried to put in an electric arc furnace facility. That would not be a great outcome.
That's what SunCoke is doing, though, correct? They're building an electric arc furnace?
No, they're not. They're putting in a pig machine. They're putting in a pig iron machine. The blast furnaces will be retained. SunCoke will operate the blast furnaces. And at the end of the day, if you install an electric arc furnace facility at Granite City, the employment will still be reduced because the necessary staffing for an electric arc furnace facility of the same capacity as the blast furnaces will be about the same level of employment of USW represented workers that will remain under the proposal we've been negotiating with SunCoke to convert it into a pig iron production facility. So the net outcome of converting to electric arc furnaces at Granite City or switching it to a pig iron production facility with the continued use of the blast furnaces, this now owned by SunCoke with USW represented employees, will be the same roughly in terms of employment. So I'm happy to go into more detail later when we speak about this, but we can walk you through the options. This provides the best opportunity to preserve, at least for another 10 years, employment at Granite City. And as if you will recall, from 2015 to 2018, due to market conditions, Granite City was completely idled because it is not competitive in certain conditions in the marketplace. When steel prices are very low, Granite City, unfortunately, is not a competitive facility. So what we have tried to work out with SunCoke, which is co-located, provides the coke for the blast furnaces, is a future for over 500 steel workers at Granite City for the long term in a decarbonizing world. So the pig iron produced at Granite City will supply electric arc furnaces, just as the folks here and I have talked about, which are lower carbon intensity steelmaking. And all these electric arc furnaces that we talk about still need iron units to make the high-end steels needed, even with scrap steel. So this is a way to preserve jobs at Granite City, to also find an outlet for the iron ore that continues to come from Minnesota, will still come from Minnesota, union-represented facility, northern Minnesota, by rail to Granite City to be converted into pig iron rather than into steel. So the electric arc furnace route is not really a viable option. Also, I will tell you that the electricity prices in Illinois are not competitive.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Vice Chairman, for having this hearing today on the state of the steel industry. Thank you to our witnesses all for being here and taking the time. You know, as a freshman member of Congress, it's really important that we understand what you go through. I think part of this is always a big learning curve, and we drink water out of a fire hose routinely, but this is really important dialogue just to hear from you. Many constituents in my district benefit from the steel industry. Nucor Steel has not one, not two, but 3 locations in South Carolina, 7. This past summer, I had an opportunity to visit the Nucor Steel facility in Darlington, South Carolina, which has been producing steel for 50 years in South Carolina. Mr. Topalian, last year Nucor invested in NuScale, a developer of small modular reactor nuclear plants. Most recently, you announced a memorandum of understanding with NuScale to explore deployment of those at Nucor steel mills. Walk me through why Nucor made this decision, and what could the deployment of this technology mean for the steel industry?
Thank you, Congressman. And look, as we look at the industry, we look at the IRA and building renewable energy. It's important, but also our country's and our company's goals in the future to re-engage and think about nuclear as the cleanest and most viable and sustainable and affordable energy source is critically important. You know, 60 years ago, Nucor Corporation was known as Nuclear Corporation of America before we traded and changed our name to Nucor. So we have a long history in how we think about that, and as a large user of electricity, that Scope 2 emissions is something that we think about an awful lot. And so again, I think it's long overdue for our nation to reinvest, recommit to nuclear energy. I think the SMR technologies, the small modular reactors, which are typically about 50 to 75 megawatts, create an ideal solution for not just our industry, but the manufacturing in grid itself to provide not just companies like Nucor, but U.S. citizens a clean and reliable 24/7 power source that, again, we think holds great promise, and we'll continue to find and look for opportunities to explore that.
Thank you, sir. Next, I want to touch on the Section 232 tariffs. So this question is for you, Mr. Topalian, Ms. Smith, and Mr. Annakin, who, by the way, has the coolest name if you're a Star Wars fan. First, what impact has the 232 steel tariff that was implemented in 2018 had on your business?
Yeah, I think as you've heard in many of the testimonies, when it was enacted in the spring of 2018, it was a critical piece of legislation. It was an important opportunity to bring other nations to the negotiating table and negotiate a fair trade, not free trade, but fair trade agreement with those nations. And so we've seen that. We've seen it with USMCA, we've seen it with the Chorus Agreement. We're in the midst of negotiating something with the EU. But again, like most policy, the devil's in the details. Nucor supports and thinks 232 needs to remain in place. We thank the caucus for your advocacy in keeping that in place. And when those countries breach those rules that have been impacted, we need to take immediate and swift action. One of the things that we're going to continue to urge each of you in this caucus is we've got to find effective and faster trade remedies to deal with these bad actors, and including when a 232 is lifted on a nation and they breach those agreements, like Mexico, we have much, much faster action and can counteract that much more quickly. But overall, I would tell you for the industry, it's been a very important piece of legislation that we've supported.
In the interest of time, Ms. Smith, Mr. Annakin, would y'all echo that? Would y'all support that statement, what Mr. Topalian said?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
And question, this is again is to the three of you, and we'll start with you, Ms. Smith. So we'll give you a little bit of airtime here. But what is your company? Do they have a plan to meet the increased demand that is kind of gripping the United States right now?
Thank you for the question. As I mentioned in my statement, we are in the process of a number of investments in new steelmaking capacity based upon new steelmaking technology. We are commissioning our new mill in Mesa, Arizona, which will be poised to meet the needs of the infrastructure, the existing FAST Act, as well as the new infrastructure investments that are being contemplated and planned. We announced earlier this year our intent to build another micromill in West Virginia, which again will be coming online in a time frame to meet the increasing demand. And our business supports largely infrastructure, unlike some others that have a broader product range. So we're keenly focused on that, and we will be prepared to meet the increasing needs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see that my time has expired, and with that, I yield back, sir.
Gentleman yields. Ms. Sewell, 5 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to thank the Steel Caucus, run so ably by Rick Crawford and Frank Mrvan, for always representing the interests of U.S. steel companies all around America. We know that these are good paying jobs. We know that it allows the folks the workers, the Alabama workers, I represent the state of Alabama and specifically District 7, and we're so proud of the fact that we have both Nucor, several facilities of Nucor as well as U.S. Steel. In so many ways, Alabama has been called the Pittsburgh of the South, and we take that as a badge of honor. The steel workers of Alabama have great paying jobs with excellent benefits, and with the help of a strong union, they are living the American dream. And we want that to continue. As we discussed today, we know that the industry, the steel industry, faces enormous challenges, including anti-market dumping from China. In 2000, China produced about 18% of the world's supply of steel, and today it provides roughly 50%. By modernizing our trade policies, we can finally combat China's Belt and Road Initiative and their subsidization of factories that are designed to dodge our current U.S. trade laws. Here's what I know for a fact. If American companies and American workers are allowed to play on a level playing field, we will win each and every time because we do produce the best steel. So I am proud to announce that I will be reintroducing the Leveling the Playing Field 2.0 Act this morning. I believe all of you endorsed the bill last Congress, and we look forward to working with you again this Congress to get the bill across the finish line and signed into law. At the end of the day, this bill is about standing up to China and protecting good-paying American jobs. I would like to thank my colleagues, Bill Johnson, Frank Mrvan, as well as Beth Van Dyne, for co-leading this transformational legislation with me in the House of Representatives. I would also like to thank Senator Brown and Young for being the champions of this bill on the Senate side. Moreover, I was proud to co-lead the bipartisan Fighting the Trade Cheaters Act with my colleague Mike Bose, which will increase civil penalties for fraudulent and grossly negligent violations of the U.S. trade laws. These two bills are concrete examples of legislation that will directly combat China's illegal trade practices. As a proud member of the Ways and Means Subcommittee on Trade, I can assure you that I will continue to fight for stronger enforcement of U.S. trade laws, and that we will seek to do all that we can to uplift American workers and American steel industry. I know that our several of the panelists have already commented on Leveling the Playing Field 2.0, but I know that Mr. Topalian, as well as Mr. Sorry, I'm losing track. Sorry. The panelists that have not commented on Leveling the Playing Field 2.0, I would love to hear your thoughts about how this legislation will be transformative to this industry.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you for your support. We, Nucor and our 32,000 team members, thank you for, in the caucus, for the work that you and the senators have done to reintroduce this. We are all going to be benefactors of that. And as you mentioned, illegal dumping and subsidies is something that will never go away. You know, when you have a country like China that can produce over 1.3 billion metric tons of steel annually that it doesn't consume, it's going to find the home in the greatest economy in the world, which is the United States. We've got to be at the ready, and we've got to continue to look for ways to faster implement the dumping, because their proclivity to find circumvention is nonstop. It will continue
Absolutely.
Every day. And so
I'd love to hear from Mr. Fruehauf as well. I'm sorry, my time is running.
You're good. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Sewell. No, we absolutely commend you and support any new legislation that strengthens our trade laws. It's absolutely critical. And so thank you for your support, both for our Fairfield Works in Birmingham, which actually I've been there, and they say that Pittsburgh is the Birmingham of the North.
Exactly, that's what we say.
So,
and
but thank you for your support, and we do support the legislation.
Absolutely. And in closing again, I'd just like to say to our co-chairs of the Steel Caucus, we have a fight ahead of us, but I think that bipartisan support of our U.S. steel industry will help us be able to get these American workers and American steel companies on the right road. So thanks.
Gentlelady yields. Dr. Baird.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and appreciate all of you witnesses being here. I think what I can do is share a personal experience. Nucor has a new facility, or has a facility in Crawfordsville, Indiana. Mr. Topalian, you know that. And so when it was coming, when the plant was being built, started employing a lot of the young farmers around that area. I mean, a lot of us. So I decided that I ought to find out about this facility and kind of know what it does. And so I made a call, and one of your people answered the phone, and I said, I got some salvage steel that I would like to sell, and are you interested? And he said, sure. But he said, how much do you have? So I thought for a minute, and I said, I think I could get a pickup load pretty quick. And he just chuckled on the other end, and he said, sir, we'd like to help you, but we deal in carloads, railroad carloads, semi-loads, but I can refer you to some other people to help. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that the addition of your facility in Crawfordsville, Indiana, which is just south of Representative Mrvan, I butt up against him anyway, was a real addition to our community. Those young farmers and farm families, they could be employed there, and you were very cooperative with letting them have flexible schedules, but they had health insurance for the family, so they could continue on to pursue their agricultural interests. And so my question is going to be, from all of you, what's the situation about getting good labor? I'm very proud. I want you to know, agriculture is my background, and I'm very proud of the young people that you have there at Crawfordsville. So my question is for all of you is labor.
Well, Congressman, thank you for that. And, we're proud of Crawfordsville. Our founder, Ken Iverson, bet the company on that investment and that technology to thin strip casting. And so, it's celebrated inside of Nucor as one of the pioneers of the mini mill technologies. And so it began a great longstanding tradition in Nucor. Our founder used to say he would drive until the radio in his car lost its signal, and then that's where he would begin to look for a site to build a facility, because the rural, hardworking, middle-class Americans that have ingenuity and strong work ethic and value sets are the exact team members that we look to hire today and over the last 50 years. Our team members are the greatest value creators of Nucor. It's not the technology, it's not our steel mills, it's not the plants, it is our people. It is the 32,000 men and women who make that up. And when you take great care of them and you provide them great paying jobs at over $140,000 average annual wage last year, and 3 weeks ago we got to reward them by giving 10% of our profits back, which was $1 billion shared amongst our 32,000 team members. So when you do that, you create an awful high retention rate, single-digit retention rate that we're very proud of. But to your point, the labor market remains incredibly tight. We're no longer competing against one another for that young talent. We're competing against companies like Google and Microsoft and Tesla and everyone else in the Fortune 100 that are looking for that same talent. So we retain it at a very high level. We're having to get more creative in how we find and introduce and attract tomorrow's talent into the steelmaking industry. Thank you.
Congressman, Cleveland-Cliffs is present in Indiana. Actually, among our 27,000 employees, 9,250 are in the state of Indiana. Between Indiana Harbor, Burns Harbor, New Carlisle, Rockport, Columbus, Indiana, and some smaller locations. We don't have any problems with labor there because we pay them well. And we treat union workers as part of the company. We have an indivisible bond with our unions. That's a recipe for success. We have a lot of support from the state, from the governor, from Congressman Mrvan, that the majority of my employees are in his district. and several other people in the state of Indiana. So there's no problem. We just need to educate our people that good paying union middle class jobs are very good jobs, and you can raise a family working for a steel mill.
I see that I'm out of time, but I want you to know too that, agriculture, the equipment we use today uses a lot of iron, and you want quality iron. You don't want to be broke down when you're trying to plant a crop. So with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Baird. And I think our final member from Minnesota, Mr. Stauber, we'll recognize you for 5 minutes. Glad you got your gear.
I hope you guys didn't see what I was just doing. I forgot my hearing aids this morning, and I literally just got them in. So I want to thank Chairman Crawford and Vice Chairman Mrvan for holding this. And, the district that I represent in northern Minnesota shares a deep generational history with the U.S. steel industry. The blue-collar union workers across the Iron Range have supplied iron ore and taconite for our domestic steel industry for over a century and a half. Today, almost 80% of the steel produced domestically in the United States uses iron ore and taconite from the 8th Congressional District, the Iron Range. The steel industry supports nearly 60,000 jobs across Minnesota and provides over a $4 billion direct and indirect wages for hardworking Minnesotans. During my time in Congress, I have fought to protect our domestic steel industry, particularly from the market manipulation from China and other foreign adversaries. The Section 232 tariffs levied on steel are critical to ensuring the survival of the American steel industry. And I would submit that every member of this caucus agrees with that. The price of steel can mean two things for workers in the district I represent: either a pink slip or bonuses for our workers. Without these tariffs, China will be able to manipulate prices and decimate American steel as we know it. We will not let that happen. Mr. Fruehauf, I'm looking forward to seeing the completion of U.S. Steel's new DR-grade iron ore pellet production facility at Keetac on the Iron Range. This new facility will ensure that we continue to produce products that are mined, melted, and made in America. Can you talk about how this investment helps the Iron Range diversify to meet the future needs of American-made steel?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Stauber. So by producing a direct reduced iron grade pellet, the output from our Keetac mine in your district will now go to feeding electric arc furnaces in addition to blast furnaces. So traditionally, our iron ore pellet production went to blast furnaces only. Now with this new pellet line that we're hopefully going to have operational in the near future, we'll be able to supply both supply chains. And one thing I think that's really important for the committee to recognize, we talked about the race to go green in steel. The United States has the best quality iron ore among any country in the world. And so for a direct reduced iron pellet, you need a higher quality of iron. We have that in the Mesabi Iron Range. They don't have that in Europe. So it's a key advantage for our country. And I also wanted to note, we're creating more. It's a net increase in USW represented jobs with that investment.
Well, we appreciate the $150 million investment as well. Mr. Goncalves, as you noted in your written testimony, Cleveland-Cliffs has made incredible investments focused on improving the company's environmental impact. Can you share a bit more on these new investments and how they are utilizing innovative technologies to help reduce Cliffs' environmental footprint, as well as the role iron ore from Minnesota plays in that? And how would you say this differentiates Cleveland-Cliffs from steelmakers operating overseas?
That's a great question, Congressman Stauber. Appreciate the question. There's a tendency, particularly here in the United States, because the industry has an enormous participation of electric arc furnaces, to talk lowly about blast furnaces, lumping together all blast furnaces as if all blast furnaces were the same. They are not. We have the most advanced blast furnace technology in the entire world, and we continue to prove that every day. We are the highest users of HBI, direct reduced iron in the form of hot briquetted iron, in blast furnaces in the entire world. This pre-reduced iron does not need coke, so does not need C. It's pre-reduced. So we reduce the usage of cokes, therefore reduce the generation of CO2 to numbers that are not replicable around the world. Nippon Steel, for decades, was the benchmark of the production of steel for the automotive industry, just refurbished the blast furnace in Nagoya to supply Toyota, Honda, and Nissan, and they did it without having any consideration on use direct reduced iron. We do that here. We also use a lot of natural gas that mitigates the use of coke. And very soon we're going to be in Indiana using hydrogen. And that will further mitigate the use of coke. So our CO2 generation is by far the lowest in the world. So that's our differentiation, and that's why we'll continue to support the automotive industry as they go further and electrify the fleet and go to hydrogen.
And just one quick follow-up. What can Congress do to help enable this progress to continue enabling a vibrant domestic steel industry?
The very first thing is having hearings like today. And when we have a chance to expose to you what reality is about. We live in a world of the headlines. EAFs are better than blast furnaces. Yes, I agree. I have 5. And I produce electrical steels in EAFs. I produce stainless steel in EAFs. Produce a plate in EAF. But we produce a lot of other steels in blast furnace that will continue for decades. Mm-hmm. And iron ore from Minnesota and Michigan will continue to flow in, using a lot less coke and producing a lot less CO2 in comparison with the rest of the world. And that's what the 2.0 is so important. I urge you to support, pass this legislation. We are the best in what we do as a country, as an industry.
That's mined in America, manufactured in America, made in America.
Yes, sir.
I want to, before he gavels me down, one of the things that I don't think we've talked about, at least I didn't hear this morning, the SULOCs. You can be rest assured this committee, with our chairman and ranking member, we're committed to funding the SULOCs, which is so important. 16% of our GDP comes through there, and that taconite goes through the SULOCs to the southern part of our mid part of our country to make that steel. So with that, Mr. Chair, thanks for your patience.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Mrvan, any final thoughts before we conclude?
My final thoughts very quickly and concisely are, first of all, thank you. Thank you again, as I mentioned, for what you do for the families, for what you do for national security, and what you do for those hundreds of thousands of people that you employ, and your thought process, and making sure that you're protecting one of our thriving economies in Northwest Indiana when we talk about trade, and we talk about what we need to do in the tin mill, and how, as a member of Congress, we have to protect the southern border and other countries, bad actors who are now beginning to dump overcapacity within our United States. So I thank you very much and look forward to working with you in the future to make sure we have a thriving steel industry, all of you. And I do want to thank the staff members who helped put this together today, and they did a phenomenal job. And I thank you, Chairman, for all your efforts and for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, and I associate myself with the comments of the Vice Chairman. And with that, we want to thank all of you for being here today. Appreciate your thoughts, and we appreciate our ongoing relationship with your industry. Thank you, and with that, this committee hearing is adjourned.